our new podcast, HerdCon Presents Book Chats, where me and Dr. Lumpkin are going to sit down and talk about a new book and a new author each month. Our first book is going to be Storming Heaven by
Denise Giardina. I believe it's pronounced that way. Yeah, talk about that. Yeah, maybe the best way to start is maybe we'll just read a little selections. Hopefully, it won't get taken down or anything. Read some selections. I picked a serious one out. I don't know if we want to do something else and then go serious, or what your preference is.
I don't really have a preference. If you want to do serious, and then we'll lighten it up before we dip down into that darkness.
Yeah. So okay, and I have I'm gonna have to get bifocals at some point in my life, which is very sad. So this is one of the opening chapters by a character named Rondell Lloyd. Earliest thing I recall from when I was a boy is Daddy coming home from the mines and taking his bath. It always scared me when he came in. It would be way after dark, and I'd be asleep with Talcott and Kerwin in the bed in the front room. Most nights, he'd come in quiet, just lay himself down, coal dust and all, on a mat behind the cook stove in the kitchen, so as not to track dirt into the rest of the house. He would be back out before dawn anyway, so there was no need to bathe. But on Saturday, Mommy boiled water, rattled coal in the buckets to throw on the fire, pulled out the number 3 wash tub. I could never sleep through the noise. I always lay on the side of the bed next to the door, so I could hang my head over the edge and watch her. Daddy would stomp onto the back porch, peel off his boots, and bang them against the steps to knock off the crusts of mud and coal dust. He stripped off his clothes and left them in a heap for Mommy to wash the next day. She never washed his mine clothes with the rest of our things. Then Daddy came inside. His face and hands were black and shiny. The rest of him was pale and waxy like lard. The whites of his eyes were vivid. He tossed his pay envelope on the kitchen table. Snake again, was all he would say, meaning that he hadn't been able to earn enough money, hadn't been able to mine enough coal to pay off the bills at the company store, and that he still owed for food and doctoring and his work tools and blasting powder, that his paycheck had been a single wavy line where the money figure should have been. But I learned about those things later. At that age, I thought he meant he had seen a copperhead, and that was why his eyes looked so wild and frightful. I lived in terror of snakes.
That is a great selection, Dr. Lumpkin. Mine is not as long and, like we said before, a little funny. As soon as I heard this line, I immediately laughed because as a West Virginia native, I was like, oh, wow, I've never heard anything more West Virginian in my life. So we made love to the rhythm of the rails and afterwards fed each other fried chicken. I don't know why, I just loved that line. It was very, I think, unexpected.
And I think this is a novel that has a lot going on. And yes, it even has a baseball game in it.
For sure. And the way the baseball game is set up and the way it's talked about, I found really interesting. This idea that we're doing nice things for you, but it's really so you fight each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You very much the divide and conquer, and those tensions between workers and the company, and so to speak. Yeah.
For sure. And would you like to pause our book conversation, let everybody get a little context about our author today?
Yeah, I'd let you know, and I'm going to introduce Denise Giardina just very briefly, and then we'll get back to the discussion. Denise Giardina was born in Bluefield, West Virginia, and spent her early years in a coal camp. She earned a BA in history from West Virginia Wesleyan and later her Master's of Divinity from the Virginia Theological Seminary. Giardina has served as a congressional aide, a political activist who advocated for labor rights and against mountaintop removal, and she even ran for governor under the Mountain Party in 2000. She taught for a number of years at West Virginia State University and is an ordained deacon in the Episcopal Church. She's the author of Good King Harry, The Unquiet Earth, and Saints and Villains, among others. In 2000, Heeding the Call, a study of Denise Giardina's novels by William Joliffe was published. It is the first full book-length analysis of Giardina's work, which tells you she's kind of a big deal. Her second novel, Storming Earth, was published in 1987 and went on to win the Lillian Smith Book Award, Appalachian Book of the Year, and the Weatherford Award in Fiction. And last and probably least, this is the novel we will be discussing today on Book Chat. So, kind of had, we go through, we'll kind of switch off the books that we pick between Megan and myself. And this was my pick. And so we do the picks, ideally, like let the person who had to be subjected to reading the book to go first. It could be pleasurable, it could be painful, who knows? But what's your hot take on this book?
So for me, it was very slow getting started. I think I was like 50% of the way through the book when I realized where it was headed. So there was a lot of setup, but I didn't expect it to be so funny. And like I said, I don't know if people that aren't familiar with West Virginia history will get it, but I know I mentioned in our longer podcast where we discussed J.D. Vance and Homer Hickam that I'm from Logan. So it was very exciting to me to hear her talk about all these places that I knew and grew up in. I could so easily picture it. And, I think we were talking about beforehand that I think he was the UMAW president. UMWA, I apologize.
Frank Keeney.
Yeah, Frank Keeney, that I had the pleasure of having his great-grandson as a professor at the at the community college there in Logan. So it was really interesting seeing names that I knew or recognizing things for history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is one of these books, and I teach Appalachian Lit periodically here at Marshall, and it's one of these books that I've gotten to where like I can't not teach it, and not only teach it, but teach it first, because it's a book. There's going to be students from Logan County or Mingo or in the Huntington or the Charleston area, and they might recognize some of these places. And I do think there's a kind of connection. I think wherever you set a book, the people who are there, or it kind of lets their interest perk up. Like, oh, this is where we live. There's a story worth telling there. So yeah, I think, and it's a very popular book, and given its popularity with students, but also like students will say things like, oh, I didn't know this was something like the mine wars really happened, or there was a battle. And then it has gotten better over the year recently, and then someone's like, oh, I'm into West Virginia history, or I'm from nearby, or have been to Blair Mountain or spent time there. So there's a lot of it's a slow, steady growing. I want to get more people to like this book, so I kind of try to find, I get them like 20 at a time.
For sure, and this is a fictionalized telling of the mine wars. But so many times I was reading things like the courthouse shooting,
Mm-hmm.
and I was thinking to myself, is this based on the shooting of Sid Hatfield and Ed Chambers? Like, because that was a real thing that happened. And just the scenario around that courthouse shooting in the book was very, very similar to the real events that happened in McDowell County.
Mm-hmm.
So I just loved the way that even fictionalized that she worked in real events that really happened and their real motivations.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think about like tales that we think about, quote unquote, epics, and they're about big events, big events happening, important events, historical events. And I think that some of her acumen, Giardina's acumen as a history writer, historical fiction, one of her first books was Good King Harry, about Henry V, is that she can do these kind of big stories, but also personalize it. And, because we think about epic stories, it's big backdrop and then personal stories.
Yeah.
Like The Lord of the Rings, it's about some hobbits that just want to live a quiet life, and they're thrown in to have this, world war and things like that. So it is this kind of having that larger scope, but also that greater intimacy in the story.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of like wanting a quieter life, we've talked about in our emails leading up to this the character of Carrie Bishop, and it seems like I don't know if she always wanted such an interesting life, um, but definitely her life becomes anything but quiet.
Yeah, she she seems like the she kind of grows up under this that she's the less she's never good enough for whatever. She's not really meant to be a spinster. She's not really meant to be a settled down woman like her older sister Flory. That it's just wherever drama goes. She goes where the drama is, and I think she's interested in guys. She's interested in two men in the story, and it is like whether she realizes it or not, she likes the drama.
For sure. And I thought that was a really interesting and progressive aspect of the book, especially being written in 1988, I believe.
87. Yeah.
87. Um,
It was the 80s. So
it's
yeah.
true. You had Albion, who she ends up marrying, and they have this moment where he tells her that he understands that she loves another man, and he's okay with that. He just wants his own part of her. He doesn't want to take that man's place.
Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that, but I mean, I think that clearly Carrie Bishop, Nee Freeman, I believe that's how you say it, that she does. She's a character. She's one of my favorite characters. She's a character who contains multitudes. There's a lot of love that she has for people, for family, and she can have enough, and it'd be different, and it'd be legit. I always think about love triangles, and your team Jacob and your team team whatever, your and this is kind of one where I'm like, well, I can understand both. I could understand why one person would love these two guys for very different reasons.
For sure. And Albion surprised me the whole time. Um, I felt like it was the author showing that not all men in our area are this masculine, emotionless monolith, but instead, I mean, he can't even go hunting because it breaks his heart to kill an animal.
Hmm.
And I just thought that he was just the most gentle, sweet character there was. And then you had Rondell, who
Hmm.
was the exact opposite, firebrand. Um, when he's in the train getting help and he pulls out his red bandana and basically spits in the face. Oh my goodness. I was so excited for that scene.
Hmm. Yeah, and it basically ends up ruining Carrie's brother Miles's career prospects and things like that.
Miles deserved it.
Yeah, yeah. I think too. Yeah, to getting back to Albion and Rondell, I think it is a book. I think it's something that is. It shows the kind of sensitivities of the male characters, even particularly when Rondell is younger, and he's interested in education, and this is one of these vicious kind of things where the mind kind of forces families to send their kids in when they're young just to get a paycheck, and that he goes down with his canary. There's a scene where he goes down with his canary, and the something bad. We try not to spoil everything here, but that the canary, something bad happens at the canary, and there's such a sense of sadness out of it, and little things, and that there's this kind of gentleness in a lot of the men that gets hardened in different ways, and where Albion, he's a complicated guy, and he seems very harmless, but he's also like he's a one that as he's a, a preacher, and a very like he's a preacher who doesn't believe in hell, and he's very much a pacifist, but he's like right there wanting to organize, and he wants to go into the mines to preach, and then it ends up being like I can help with the the union in some way, which is the larger struggle that's going on throughout this story. Is there's all this kind of romance and drama and passion going on.
I just want to return to the education aspect really quickly. There was a few quotes that I noted down that I thought really exemplify, still a little bit, unfortunately, the Southern West Virginia attitudes toward education. The first one was he can't eat those books, and the second one being they'll teach what the boss wants him to know. So I think that this is still West Virginia is very well, at least especially Southern West Virginia, is very suspicious, especially of education. I mean, you go back and people are like, "Oh, you're college educated." So as happy as they are for you, there's still a little bit of that. You're now an outsider. It doesn't matter how long you lived here.
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like that's like anyone that ever went away to college. There's a little bit of that. I remember, what was it, when you come back after you go away to college, the only thing different is you, uh, and everything's the same and everything. Or you can constantly hear that kind of saying of like this a hometown's like a bucket of crabs. You try to get out and they pull you back down. But there is this great hesitancy, and yet we talked about the character of Miles. You see an example of someone who does get education at Berea College, which is a college founded in Kentucky that is uh, it is a college with no legacy admissions. If you are at a certain economic level, you are able to get it. You can apply to get into the school. So it's a free school for kind of working class, kind of people who are impoverished.
I can't remember exactly, but Berea, weren't they also famous for being like one of the first interracial
Yeah,
colleges?
yeah. So they're a private school, still are a private school, and yeah, you think about it in Kentucky, in the South, uh, the central and southern Appalachians, very much the South, as well. That they had kind of wanted to be more equal about that and inclusive, which I always think about with Giardina is that does she have an axe to grind with Berea College? Because it's just like wow, that what were they teaching during that time period? Because Miles is such a he just really get they talk about people getting above their raising, and it's getting above their raising to the detriment of humanity. It's one thing for him to know, but it's one thing for him to learn. It's another thing that he's forgotten what what it was like to work among people and people, families that had struggles or somebody that gets. It's like he seems above it all, and he also seems he clearly benefits from the system, and he's just like helpless. I can't help you. I wrote letters to the company, and I think also that also that distrust in those kind of uh, coal town schools that they're going
Yeah.
to teach a thing in a certain way, or the preachers are going, they're getting paid by them, so they have to do it. So the sense of independence, independent thought, independent thinking, which is very much the town of Annandale, which is the free town, which feels very much like what the historical comparison would be Maitland. Uh, is this town where people were not under the heel of coal companies at that
And I found bringing it back to Albion because he is definitely one of the most interesting characters in the book to be a preacher. It when I was reading it at first, and he leaves his pretty comfortable life to go into the coal mines because God told him to. When I first read that, it was really strange for me because I was like, oh well, if he's still a preaching, won't the coal companies pay him? And then I realized, oh, he doesn't want to be under control of the coal
point.
companies. And I think that that is really important. And I think that's one of the reasons why he brings the town together so well, is that he left a pretty decent setup to go and get these men really touch them.
Yeah.
He met them where they were.
Yeah. And it's humorous because they think, oh, he's a preacher. That'll, allow they're having a miserable existence. So maybe the preacher will help them deal with that. And so he's not a threat. But it's actually, he's like a, he's like a spy in a lot of ways in that.
And we've talked a little bit about the love triangle, but I also really laughed because it felt like this was almost a Romeo and Juliet story once Miles and Carrie grew up, because you had the boss man versus the union,
Hmm.
and she loved them both. It was one of those family or love kind of situations, and I was like, oh, kind of like Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah. I mean, it's, she doesn't, I mean, she she tries not to give. I guess in the end, Miles does the right thing.
Eh,
But yeah, he's like, yeah, you
too
need.
little, too late.
Yeah, yeah. I don't like Miles.
Me
uh,
either.
but yeah, I mean that it. I think it, and a lot of it has to do. I think with, and I think what Giardina does really well is character. If anything, whatever the this is the thing to read the novel for, is that she provides these complicated characters that want they want to encompass so much, and that they want to be so much, but that leads to so many conflicts.
Speaking of those characters, we see race relations in this. Um, and I found it really interesting, and I really appreciated the way she handled this because you had certain characters. There were times where I was like, I don't know what race this man is. He's hanging out with the black people and with the white people, and it's not a weird thing. And I really love that, especially when they were talking about the red bandanas, because so much the word redneck has been so turned when really they were so racially accepted. I can't remember which book it was in, but they were talking about the mines, and they said all men are black down here.
Hmm.
Your skin color doesn't matter when you're covered in coal.
Yeah,
Uh,
that sense of commonality, that sense of the mine could fall, the ceiling could drop with on anybody, and that for your preservation you help, and for their preservation you don't know if you're going to be there, so you help somebody out. So there's this kind of mutual thing that I believe it's not a utopia down in the coal mine, but it is a place where things can be more equal, because your job is to mine and get home safe, and making sure everybody does that.
and
Go ahead.
like you said, she does make complex characters, so there is use of the N word and there is racism happening in the book. But our main cast really don't care about that. I mean, Carrie works for a black doctor.
Yeah. And
That's
we can see, and she even in one of her chapters, she even admits kind of her trepidations. But then she gets to know him, and he's a good doctor. He pays her better than anybody else would when she works. She's a nurse, so when she works as a nurse, so it is just it's a thing. Yeah, there there's so much, and I think so much, and the novel does a good job of kind of laying out how people are separated:
Mhm.
the Italians, the African Americans, the Appalachians that are there, the those whites, and separating them out, and that despite finding that common cause, again, it's the mind's greed that they're doing this kind of thing, and they it seems often like a struggle to do that, because you know people there's the word socialism gets popped up sometimes. Like, I'm not a socialist, but I'll help you out. I'll help you out. That trying to find common cause with people who see themselves as very different to what their cause is, which I think it's a novel that gets at that kind of grassroots level of things get messy at that point. You have to work with people that don't completely see eye to eye with you, but you're finding kind of common cause.
I love that you bring up the socialism because I think it's Dr. Booker who talks about how Appalachia's always been socialist and it always will. And I mean, I absolutely agree with that. Um, like in Logan, if somebody loses their house, everyone will pitch in to make sure that they're clothed and fed and taken care of. And so I think it's really funny in our political climate today that they don't see that as socialism.
Yeah, yeah, and it is this. It's this kind of, it feels like this kind of dirty word. It's a little aside. I remember I recently saw Oppenheimer in the theater. Finally completed my Barbenheimer of viewing to see both of those, which I thought were both great. Um, and there's a lot in that where somebody at one point, like the government questioning the various scientists. Oh, you went to a union organizing meeting once, so you must be a commie or a socialist. That this was something, it seems really, really silly to us now, but that was seen as just going to hear somebody speak about socialism, or maybe we want to form a union, is something that you are a fundamental threat to the American way of life.
And I think that it is so interesting that within that we we still see the argument that we have today. What is more American? Is it more American to not be a socialist and be an anti-union, or is it more American to band together against tyranny? Like, you have that divide there.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's the kind of thing where like, and I think that the kind of key thing in the novel early on is that shift from a subsistence existence to your job is whatever the company demands of you, whatever company, whether it be a logging company, uh, coal mine, other extractive resources, minerals, and things like that, is that you were I mean, and again, there's a reason why, because living subsistently is a tough life, and that working for a coal company, you got a house, you had a place to live, you could get stuff on credit. There was a stability in that way, but you also, you know, had to sell your years of your life, destroy your body, and to sell your soul to do that. And these are not appealing, not, but both are very tough. But I think it is kind of easy to kind of romanticize that I'm on my own, I'm independent. That's one way of looking at it. But and that way, even have one of Rhonda Lloyd's relatives. He's like, he lives the old way. So he's like some backwoodsman growing, making moonshine and just living off the land. And that's not the case for many of the characters. They have to work for somebody, and to do that, they work for somebody. They are fighting for their rights, for a good wage, for a decent living.
I absolutely agree. I would say one thing: if people are going to read this book, maybe just before you pick it up, or read a little bit about how mining was handled back then, because they make references to like not getting paid for what they coal mined. So, like going into this book, you need to know how that was done. That these miners are not paid hourly like they were now; they got paid by how much coal they
Yeah,
mined.
but by the ton,
Yeah.
or the
So there are definitely those differences. And some of the vocabulary, if you don't know a scab is someone who works during a strike, you might be a little confused. But just that little tiny, maybe even a Wikipedia search.
hmm There's a little fun fact I'd heard that actually flight attendants don't get paid. They don't actually get paid until the door of the plane shuts. Like all that other stuff, they're doing some sort of work. They don't get paid for, which is crazy for me to think about. And just, yeah, that the miners would, and also the coal companies. They're the ones weighing the tonnage, so it could be what they call a long ton. It's a little bit, it's a little more than 2,000 pounds for a ton.
Yeah, and that really that's what keeps people bringing their children into the mine because they're not getting paid hourly. So if their kid can do 100 pounds of coal, that's at least something a little more.
hmm There's the one. I think there's the one prettier description of kind of the coals coming through these kind of chutes, and like the little kids can get the slate out.
Hmm.
So this is kind of a kids with little hands, 10-year young people get the slate out. They'd only paid so much, but they would basically someone would like whip them if they missed a thing. So it's something that feels very some kind of Dickensian kind of uh, uh, bad factory work situation that's there.
I don't want to get too much off topic, um, but I did want to look at. I thought it was very interesting that it doesn't seem like any of our girl characters really have daddy issues. I mean, you do have Carrie when she asks, "Did I ever really love my father?" But more, it's Rondell dealing with his mother issues. He has that whole moment where he talks about how his mom said that the wrong kid died in the mine.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so we have like I don't know. There's just something I appreciate about seeing that switch, like that play on gender. That Carrie is absolutely fine whether she loved her daddy or not. It's
Mhm.
not something she really thinks about. While Rondell is the one haunted and can't commit and doesn't feel like he's worth love because of his mother. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the key scenes, it was early on, so but yeah, he goes into the mine, bad things happen, and he wants to be comforted by his mother afterward. It's like, well, uh, there's something or other, and he's expecting to get a switch or whatever. He expects her to whip him. And he's like, "What's the point? You're working the mines now. You're your dad's now."
Yeah, and just that idea that one son, I mean, Rhonda was getting the opportunity to get an education, um, and yet she was so upset because her favorite son
Yeah, yeah.
was forced to go into mines because Rhonda wouldn't.
Was also like really messed up. Rondell's dad is is just Clabe, I believe it's pronounced. He's like, I find it comforting if I have one of my young sons in the mine with me.
We'll die together.
Yeah,
My whole family line will be wiped out. It's
yeah,
okay.
yeah. It's okay. It's like wow. But I mean, that tells you what a toll it takes on somebody. You should not invite your 10-year-old to work in the mine to earn a wage for you. But yeah, his parents just not good examples of parenting of nurturing, or I no wonder he was a little wary of relationships.
All right. As we're winding down, is there any other subjects or themes in the book that you would like to bring up?
I think I what's the other subjects I wanted to bring up? Sorry.
No, you're okay.
I think to me at least, I think this with that shift from, and I think this is something like kind of the environmental aspect of it that's running through the book. It is it kind of an ecological book, I would say, in part because the way the lands change, the displacement of people, characters who don't want to go where their land's been sold or taken from them illegally. Uh, that's and there's a scene in the kind of the Bishop homeland, the home place, that Miles, terrible character, wants to log the land, and Carrie's like, I like these trees, and it's a thing that causes a lot of grief. But the sense of seeing land as this is something that I can make a profit out of. I can sell these logs, and we can have a can get these logs processed and cut. We can build a better house. When I think there are these are a lot of characters who are more or less content with their lives, uh, but other things intervene to make their lives miserable in the process, and the grief. And there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of suffering that a lot of these characters take, and it's heavy. It's sad, and maybe there's a little. I feel like there's a little bit of hope, but these are people who lived intense lives, to say the least.
I found it really interesting. I'm not going to spoil anything, but where she chooses to pull Carrie out of the battle. Like, we don't even really get to see the biggest part that this book's leading up to.
Hmm.
We don't see the Battle of Blair Mountain in its fullness. And I really thought that was a very interesting call because it's like it doesn't matter how committed you are to the cause, you've got to go when you got to go.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's. I think it's a kind of thing where I would love this if this was ever a TV show or like a limited series. I think there's so many good actors, American actors or British. They'd be great in this. But I think in something like that, it would like we got to show this. So it would have to be some sort of practical fight, practical battle, or some kind of CGI spectacle of some sort. It'd be a little. They probably do a pretty good job with it, but I think I like the reasoning, and we kind of just go up to it and then see the fallout from
For sure. And then one of the last things that I had a note on here, and it was just a part that made me laugh. She's talking, this is during like the big mine war at the end, and she's talking about how there's English people there. And she mentions how they have an interpreter. And I thought that was the funniest thing because I've never had trouble understanding British people. But I'm like, so is the interpreter there so they can speak redneck and hillbilly? Like, I just thought that was so funny that
it.
an English person needed an interpreter.
Yeah, and it is the variety of types of English can be. I just remember a story once. I think it was one of maybe it was my high school Spanish teacher, and he was doing something in Spain, and he was with someone from Scotland and Ireland, and they just talked in Spanish because they really couldn't understand each other. It's like, okay, we all know Spanish, so it's better if we do that. But it is, just the ways in which language develops and changes and take wherever it's at, those, it differentiates itself ever so much.
Yeah, for sure. Like, my husband is from right over the mountain, and people can't tell we're from the same area because my accent is so much lighter than his. Um,
Yeah, and just little regional things. I'm not a linguist. I know some of like that was always like in that sometimes linguists can. Oh, I know where you're from and how many years you spent there or something like that. But yeah, I mean it is the way that you speak, the way that you extend your vowels or not extend, that tells a story about you. So.
for sure. I didn't live my entire life in Logan, and sometimes people in Logan, where I've spent most of my life, will ask me where I'm from
Mhm.
because they can hear that my accent is not like. I mean, obviously it is. I spend a lot of time there,
Mhm.
but there's just slight differences, and people down there can hear it and they know it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I grew up in the South. I spent some time in Indiana and Nebraska. I'm sure that flattened some things. It's probably slow. It's probably gotten I tend to have a drawl. I don't know, but yeah, it probably slowly creeps back in sometimes. So if I go down and spend any time in the South, like in Georgia, I'll come back with it pretty strong for a little while. So it happens.
And just a little fun side note, I actually met the actress who plays Luna Lovegood, Eviana Lynch in Harry Potter.
Ah,
And she asked me if I was from Australia.
okay. All right. Good
She
day
heard
then.
the Appalachian accent and thought, Australia. It's
Y-
very interesting.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right. If so, what are your final thoughts on the book? If you're going to leave anybody with a final impression.
I would say, as someone who assigns this book, has read it a number of, I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in the mine wars, in Appalachian literature, just historical fiction. You want a big love story, you want action. There was a baseball game. It's one of those, like, it's got a little something for everybody, and maybe that's why I love to assign it. But I highly recommend it. It's not that long. It's smaller. The little cheap paperback edition is a little over 300 pages. I love just about everything. We did some really good quotations, but it's just all good to me. So as far as I'm concerned, this book's pretty close to bulletproof. So.
My final thought is that Carrie Bishop could fit in any modern society today, but she deserved better than what she got.
She did. She did. She could fit in a time before her time, in her time, even now. Yeah, she's one of my one of my fictional heroes for sure.
She deserved better than the end that she got. It was coming. It was foreshadowed.
Hmm. I
But
I would say that there is. I wouldn't say it's a sequel, but the book that Giardina did afterwards, Unquiet Earth, is not so much a sequel, but it is kind of a next generation continuation of that Unquiet Earth. Got that. Highly recommend that as well. So if you want to know what happens next to the next generation, um, and that covers several decades, that you can continue that. If you like Storm in Heaven, you'll probably like Unquiet Earth.
and do you want to go ahead and plug and let people know where they can get this?
Yeah, of course. We here at Book Chat encourage you to support independent bookstores where you can use bookstores. Uh, if you're like me and you like to mark your books up and underline things and put check marks over the passages, then I would encourage you all to seek out a copy for yourself. Um, One of the stores I really like is, and kind of my independent bookstore shout out. I'm keeping it local in the Huntington area, but Cicada Books and Coffee at 604 14th Street West in Huntington, West Virginia. It is an independent bookstore, family owned. They opened a few years back, and they're still going strong. You can find them on Facebook and Instagram. A lovely place to hang out and have a cup of coffee and check around for some books. Uh, Storming Heaven might not be there. I do believe they might have an Appalachian section. Don't quote me on that, but you might be able to find that and other, but this is a book you could probably find in a lot of independent bookstores in the Appalachian region.
Or if you're more like me, I am definitely a listen and take notes kind of girl. Using the Cabell County Public Library, I was able to get the audiobook through, I think, Hoopla. It might have been Libby, but I think it's Hoopla. If anybody wants to do that instead, make sure they like it before purchasing it. The Cabell County Library definitely has the audiobook in the list.
Cool. So many options to read, many options to experience this book, and it is an experience.
And as we mentioned in the beginning, this is going to be a monthly podcast. So our next month, because it is spooky season, we will be covering a book called Coffin Hollow. It is not a novel instead. It is actually a collection of stories. So we're not going to get a chance to talk about all of them. But me and Dr. Lumpkin are both going to choose one, two, and we're going to talk about those. So there'll still be plenty more excitement left in this book when we're done talking.
So something for the Halloween season. You can have a pumpkin spice latte or whatnot, and listen to that podcast whenever it comes out.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day.